There are some vegetables that you would grow in the flower border because they look so good. But if they look good and they taste fantastic, like ruby chard, then you're onto a winner.
Growing vegetables yourself means getting to know the personality, beauty and true taste of crops which can easily be taken for granted. Technicolor chard is the dazzler of the winter vegetable garden, but can very quickly become a good meal. Artichokes hold their own with most flowers and always feel like a treat on the plate. And even salad leaves reveal hidden charms when you grow them yourself.
A lot of people think of salad as something you have in the summer, but it's possible to grow a salad and eat it every single day of the year, and easy to extend the salad season well into autumn. Autumn salad is likely to be bitter because it's going to be based on chicory, which is all bitter to a greater or lesser extent.
So you can savour leaves like bitter curly endive, peppery rocket, spicy nitsuna, and rich red Treviso. The perfect quick lunch is just moments away. Bread, cheese, and a salad combining all the different personalities of each leaf.
Make a nice big bowl so it looks generous, and if you're growing it yourself, you can afford to do this. That's one of the great things about having a good supply in the garden. And then dress it on the plate. Good olive oil, goes without saying. And with an autumn salad, because it's bitter, use balsamic vinegar, which is fundamentally sweet. It makes all the difference in the world. What goes really well with this is cheese, especially if it's quite a strong one, because the nuttiness of it with the creamy dairy quality balances the bitterness of the leaves perfectly.
God, this is fantastic. Usually I buy my cheese in town. This is nearer, it's just across the field from where we live. And this is the one we normally have for lunch, just a little Hereford.
Herefordshire isn't best known for its cheeses, but Karen Hindle, an ex-teacher from Essex turned cheesemaker, unearthed and adapted an old local recipe for the little cheese of Hereford. This traditional cheese is handmade, using milk from a dairy up the road. It's stored on wooden shelves and it takes about 3 months to mature.
It's a cow's milk cheese, quite a hard cheese. It's sort of like crossing a cheddar and a Derby cheese.
Fresh seasonal leaves, good bread and local cheese. Utterly simple, but delicious and terribly easy. When the broad beans are past it by mid-August, our autumn salad crops inherit the ground.
Fine, now take this directly.
Most salad leaves thrive in similar conditions, which is rich, moisture-retentive soil in a bit of light shade. I dig the ground over and then add some extra compost before lightly rotivating it, which refreshes the soil. Give it a quick rake over so you've got a nice smooth tilth, before sowing the fiddly little seeds as thinly as possible into shallow drills. Within a week, the first tiny leaves appear. This is when they're at their most vulnerable to the voraciously grazing slugs. To maximize vigorous growth of the survivors, you must thin your plants ruthlessly, but of course you can eat the thinnings. Keep the growing plants well watered, and although autumn leaves can tolerate cold weather pretty well, it's worth protecting chicories and endives from too much rain. And by early autumn, you'll have a good selection of salad leaves that you can pick and mix and use right through the winter. This is how salads should be, bursting with freshness, colour, and of course intense flavours. And whilst you can cook them, particularly the chicories, they're all good eaten raw. We also grow leaf vegetables for winter that have to be eaten cooked, like Cavolo Nero and the dramatically flamboyant chard. Now, both look great in the garden as they are, but within minutes the leaves can be transformed into a tasty winter meal.
Although we use ruby chard, rainbow chard and Swiss chard in all the chard recipes, I find that the standard Swiss chard has the edge on taste. Look at that stuff. It's so beautiful. You couldn't make it up, could you?
Chard is one of our favourite winter vegetables, but it is improved with strong seasoning like chilli or fresh garlic.
I'm making chard on toasted homemade bread. It's incredibly quick and easy. It absolutely erupts with colour and is full of flavour. First you have to strip the leaves from the stems, and I'm using about 2 heads of chard, mixing up the different varieties. It does need a really thorough wash to get rid of any soil or lingering snails. You basically treat chard as you would spinach. They taste fairly similar, but chard doesn't have quite such an irony aftertaste. Just add a splash of cold water in with the chard leaves and cook them gently. Then roughly chop 2 fat cloves of garlic, which you then cook in some olive oil. Add a generous pinch of chilli flakes and some sea salt. Stir it all together and then take it off the heat while you drain the chard. Then coat the lovely colourful leaves in the garlicky oil. Add a touch more salt and pepper and it's done.
Chard is a slow, long-haul crop, but it's very undemanding to grow. Sow thinly, but not too deeply, in late spring for a winter supply. Keep the weeds at bay to limit competition for water and nutrients. And when the plants are big enough to hold, thin them to ensure that this hardy vegetable grows nice and strong. Keep them well watered, or chard can bolt and run to seed if they get too dry. Healthy plants will go on growing fresh leaves after you harvest them by cutting them flush with the ground, right through into spring. But to do that, the mature plant needs plenty of room, so thin them again after they've grown.
Pour some olive oil onto the toasted bread, then heat the chard on top. Don't delay, eat this as soon as you can.
On a rainy day, I love the whole ritual of making bread. Bread isn't difficult to make at all, although it is a bit of a palaver, but once you've made it, you'll never feel the same about a loaf again.
Start up the bread making process with starter dough, which means more work, but it does make the bread much, much nicer, makes it tastier, chewier, and lasts a lot longer.
To make starter dough, you dissolve a teaspoonful of dried yeast in a cup of warm water. Then you let that settle for 10 minutes before adding another cup of tepid water. Then add 4 cups of unbleached strong white flour and stir it for about 10 minutes. Finally knead it until the dough is springy. Leave it overnight to double in size. Starter dough is worth the effort. It gives the bread a chewier texture and better flavour.
I'm just mixing up 4 teaspoonfuls of dry yeast with some water. I don't add any sugar or anything like that because it's going to work. And yeast is the magic because it's alive. And other people, I'm sure, do it as well. Adding some water, by the way, 6 cups. Put that in. This is the starter dough, 400 grams of starter dough, which is so sticky. What I'm doing is I'm just letting the water absorb the starter dough. It's really all liquid now with a few lumps in. Lumps don't matter at all because they'll break down, and I can take a handful and just rub it off my hands. And then when that's ready, you add the flour. And I've got 2 kilos of this flour. It's white, not wholemeal. Could be better for you, I'm sure, but it's organic, it's unbleached, And the reason why we have white flour is because that's what we like. Now, at this stage, you mustn't forget to add salt. Now, I never quite know how much salt to add. A couple of tablespoonfuls will do. I don't like it with too little, because it affects the taste, and too much is bad for it. It stops the action of the yeast. Just add some more flour. Not all of it at once, otherwise it'd be harder to mix in. Okay, let's put the rest in there. This is getting quite sticky. It's not like the starter dough, which is much firmer when you first make it and becomes more sticky. This is sticky the whole way through, and if it's dry enough to handle easily, then it's too dry. So what we're going to do is put this old apron on top of it and tie it round to keep the dirt out and to keep some of the moisture in, and put it in a warm place for at least 3 hours, and it wouldn't matter 2 hoots if it was 8 hours. It would just rise more slowly, and sometimes I leave it overnight and I just knock it back down again, and then it rises again, and it's all the better for it.
Our bread oven is a bit of a performance, and the truth is any hot oven does the job. While it heats up, which takes a couple of hours, I start the next messy process of making the bread. Put lots of flour on the table because the dough is very sticky. Don't be alarmed by this, it's that gives it its particular chewy texture. Divide it up into about 3 pieces, and then flatten each piece with your hands and roll it up towards you. Turn it round and roll it again. And then just shape them into balls, and it's ready. And then a sprinkle of flour over each loaf, cover them, and leave them to rise for at least another hour. They should take about 45 minutes to cook.
However often one does this, you don't quite know if it's going to work, because the fire is variable, even if the bread is okay. Oh yeah, yeah. Well, I reckon that worked.
Leaves of all kinds are really easy to grow, but there is one very big problem: slugs and snails. It's a pretty depressing sight, seeing the true scale of the invasion. There must be tens of thousands of them. And the harsh reality is I'm never going to get rid of them. I'm sure that even poisonous slug pellets, which are anyway out of the question for organic gardeners, would fail to beat this lot. I'll never stop hating them, so my only option is to learn to live with them, and I do what I can to limit them without resorting to chemicals.
The way to get slugs where it really hurts is from the inside, and there's a nematode, which is a microscopic little worm that will do that job for you. It's called Phasmahabdis hermaphrodita, and you buy it in little packets like this and put it in the fridge and resist the temptation to eat it because it looks just like pate. And there are 12 million of them in here, and there must be 12 million because it says so, and who am I to guess? Somebody must have counted them. And they burrow into the slug, kill them, make them go away and die, and then, which is a very nice little touch, they lay their eggs in them so that they can hatch out and do it all over again. It lasts for 12 weeks. And it's in a sort of clay base, and what you have to do is put it in a bucket like that, and you add a litre of water. And it says, rinse the container out. And these things are all living. So we release them from their clay bond. All these 12 million things are zooming around in there. And then this is all a bit recipe-like and a fiddle, but it is worth it. Then you add 7 litres of water, and that makes the concentrate. Mix it up. You just take 1 pint and add it to your watering can and go and top it up with water and spray it. And particularly in areas where there are lettuce or juicy young leaves. What the slugs really destroy, in this garden anyway, are the young seedlings. They can wipe out a whole batch. So we will instead wipe out the slugs, which will be fun. The best time to use these nematodes is when the ground is wet, and preferably in the evening. So if, like me, you're doing it on a dry day, you need to water the ground first.
Nematodes are a way of introducing natural predators into the garden, which is an organically acceptable form of pest control. The concoction should be poured onto the soil around the vulnerable seedlings, and then you just leave them, hope for the best, while this deadly battle between nematode and slug goes on underground. Slugs will even target artichokes given half a chance, which at least shows they've got good taste.
I love the sort of zigzag grey leaves of artichokes and cardoons, and so we planted them all the way down this path, filling the space, and they look fantastic. Now, the fact that they also give us good food is almost incidental, because really strong, bold planting like this just looks great.
Artichokes are an undemanding plant, easy to grow from offsets, if you have the existing plants in the first place, or from seed. Just fill the pots with compost and pop in a label. We grow green glow, which have nice round leaves rather than the spiky ones. The seeds, which should be sown indoors in late spring, are easy to handle and sow individually. I add an abrasive layer of grit as a barrier against snails and slugs, and then take them to the heated greenhouse for watering. And cocooned in the warmth, the artichoke seed should germinate in about 10 days.
Now, you can see that this pot here has got 3 artichokes growing, one of which has been eaten a bit by a slug or something. 2 of them have got leaves developing with the spikes on the edge, but one of them hasn't yet. You see, those are not true leaves, and it's not ready for pricking out, and I don't really want to disturb that pot. This one's a good one, and we can see that the leaves with the spikes on the edge, they're ready. There'll be quite a decent root system in there. Now, all I do is just tip them out. I put the grit on there to keep the slugs away. There, look at all those roots at the bottom of the pot. And we've just got to break this up so they each get their own bit. This is rather wet, been thoroughly watered. That goes in there. Don't press them down too firmly. Let the roots establish themselves. And then on this one, pop that in there, holding it by a leaf, not the stem or the roots, and put that in there. If it flops, don't worry, that'll sort itself out. Now, for some reason, these 2 pots haven't germinated, so we'll remove... now that's what's been nibbling at the leaves. In my experience, artichoke seedlings go through a real sickly phase, even as if they're dying. Well, that isn't the case. They just sort of rest for a bit.
And about a month after potting on, the plant should be strong enough to cope with life in the outside world.
That's got perfectly good roots, ready to be grown. And all you have to do is just dig a small hole. I always put some grit in, because the one thing they hate is sitting in wet. Pop them in. Let's put the soil around it, give it some liquid seaweed feed, and in about a month those start to grow really vigorously.
And next year they'll start producing artichokes in earnest.
Now, if you've got an artichoke that's 3 or 4 years old, a better way to get new plants is by taking offsets. Now you can see that stalk produced most of last year's artichokes, and I cut it back at the end of winter. And around it are growing what are called these offsets, which are attached to the main root, but essentially are forming new plants. And if you get a spade, and this is where you need a sharp spade, and gently put it between the new plant and the parent, and then cut down, and you get your plant here. Now, this year, this won't do much. It will take all year to develop decent roots. You plant this out, it'll wilt disastrously. But you keep it watered, look after it, and by the end of the year it will develop to a nice strong plant, and next year it'll produce more artichokes than the parent plant, which by 5 years you normally chuck away, because although the leaves look great, it's producing hardly any artichokes. And when we're growing them like this, it's the food that we want. to help it a bit, I'm going to cut some of these leaves off so it's got less moisture loss. And just cut it off like that. There's enough left to feed the roots, but not so much that it's going to rob them of all moisture. Even so, it will flop a bit. You don't worry, you let that develop the roots, and by about July, it'll start to grow strongly.
Artichokes are at their most prolific in their second and third years, when plants produce masses of delicious flower heads from May right through to October.
Okay, I'm looking for a couple of artichokes for lunch. That's a good one. It's not ready. Oh, that one is perfect, because it's got a nice and full, it's not dry. It's got a good tight top to it, and it'll have a really good meaty choke inside it. I think I'll have a couple. This pair will be perfect. I've cut it off about here. The faster you cut them and cook them, the better, because they do dry out quite quickly. So the fresher the better, really.
These green globe artichokes are great eaten whole, just dipped in a classic butter sauce, made with fresh shallots and bay leaves from the garden. You want to quickly get a large pan of water onto the boil, and then just trim down the stalks of the artichokes before you put them in the water. Then add a whole lemon, which stops the artichokes losing their colour, and throw in a few leaves of bay.
The lid back on. Now those should have to cook for about half an hour until they're soft and just the leaves pull off very easily.
Whilst that boils away, it's time to think about the butter sauce, or Beurre Blanc. So I just need to clean up the shallots. I'm using 6 of them. You just need to peel them, cut them in half, and as they're in the soil just a few minutes ago, give them a good rinse. Chop up the shallots and try not to cry. Then put the shallots in a pan.
And to make this Beurre Blanc sauce, you need 3 tablespoons of dry wine, white wine, and then another 3 tablespoons of white wine vinegar. Right, now I've got time to cut up a 1/4 pound of butter into small pieces, which I'll then add one at a time to the reducing stock. Just beat it in slowly so the sauce thickens up. It'll be very rich, but it'll be really good. If you put it all in at once, it would become a sort of oily, melted, buttery mess. Actually, I really like making this sauce because normally I'm rushing around and tripping over everything and trying to do everything as quickly as possible. And it's quite soothing just to stand at the cooker and do something carefully for a few minutes.
Season and squeeze in some lemon juice, and then keep whisking the sauce over a low heat until it's nice and creamy. Then drain the artichokes and get eating as soon as you possibly can. On a summery afternoon, I adore the slow ritual of eating artichokes. Just stripping off leaves, dipping them in a thick buttery sauce, and getting to the tiny pad of soft flesh. This feels like real indulgence, a very special treat.